So I'll be the first to admit it, huge Wallace and Gromit fan growing up, and I was a little nervous about Vengeance Most Fowl, largely because of what the last Netflix Aardman collaboration was, which was Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget. Chicken Run being one of my favorite movies growing up, and Dawn of the Nugget being legitimately, I thought, a pretty poor sequel. I was just afraid that, like that movie, they were going to take out so much of the magic of the stop motion and mute the British humor that made Aardman what it was. So going into Wallace and Gromit, I had those fears. Luckily for me, that was not the experience I had with Wallace and Gromit Vengeance Most Fowl, a movie that I found delightful and we're going to talk about today on this channel. This is much better than honestly I could have anticipated and captures what I recall the spirit of Wallace and Gromit to be. I do just kind of want to point out something. As big of a fan as I am 27. I haven't seen Wallace and Gromit in quite a while. I've seen some of the shorts here or there. I see clips, but I haven't actually sat down and watched Wallace and Gromit. But it was something that I found quite influential. It really did help develop my sense of humor growing up. And I thought this movie had that humor, and I thought it had that spirit that I recall, with some shortcomings, which we'll get into. But for those who do not know the basic story of Vengeance Most Fowl, it follows Wallace, a British inventor who invents an AI gnome, much to the chagrin of his dog Gromit. Meanwhile, criminal mastermind Feather McGraw works to enact revenge on the duo and steal the diamond featured in the Wallace and Gromit film, The Wrong Trousers. And before I go any further, I just want to say, if you're liking this video, make sure to subscribe. You don't know how much it helps me out when you guys help me out, and it allows me to get my foot in the door with the studios who maybe otherwise wouldn't allow it to do. I cannot do what I do without you guys, so I always appreciate it. Jumping back into the review of Wallace and Gromit, I mentioned that I had some reservations about this movie, and there were some things that let me down. So let's just kind of get into the negatives of this movie, because they're not really that long. I don't have much to say. But I found this movie to be slight at times, and slight in not a bad way per se. I just found it to be familiar in approach and tone. And there was a choice made in this story to modernize these characters, and you have the character of Wallace inventing essentially something like AI, and I think it can be a bit of a commentary. I will admit I was a little bit skeptical of what this film's conclusion on AI is by its finale. I will admit the gnome in this film is very funny. It has a lot of really good jokes. And when he first came on screen, I was like, I don't know about this. And as the film goes along, the jokes really worked with this gnome. I thought it was a clever use of comedy to really shake up the dynamic of these characters. But along with some of those criticisms I was talking about, this film feeling slight, I also felt it being a little, I wouldn't call it half-baked, but it felt a little small scale for a movie. It's very short, and I know technically, and I looked it up, it's only 6 minutes shorter than the Oscar-winning film Curse of the Were-Rabbit. This movie feels far more contained and less ambitious, I guess you could say, than Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Everything feels smaller, including the sets. There's far less characters in this movie. I would say there's really 5 to 6 characters that you follow, and there's not a ton of world in this movie. Those are really my only criticisms of this movie. So it's just really to say, this isn't better than The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, and I wouldn't even say this is better than some of the really early shorts from the 90s and 2000s. That's not a bad thing because the bar is set so high with Wallace and Gromit. I found Vengeance Most Fowl to be absolutely delightful. This is 78 minutes of a movie that I just found incredibly fun. And that is due to what Aardman has always really understood with this Wallace and Gromit character, is that's the dynamic. These two are funny together, and everything else around it, you infuse it with really great British comedy in it. And I think you can call it in some ways echoes to Monty Python in some jokes. You can call it a little bit of modern British humor. And there's just a lot to really like about this movie in that sense. And while watching this movie, I was just like, yeah, this is utterly charming. Everything about this movie works. And I mentioned the AI robots in this movie. They're called Norbot. They, like I said, this is a film that when it first happens, I was like, oh no, I don't know how I feel about it. they're very funny. They have this really catchy song, and when it kept happening in the movie, I'm like, oh yeah, this is really working for me. I'm really feeling the tone set in. It's a very catchy song. And it really elevated the comedy for this movie, where the first 15 minutes of this movie, I was like, when are the jokes really going to start hitting for me? And they really start hitting with this Norbot character. And it really just excels at being a new comedic foil for this world that fits in line with what Wallace and Gromit are trying to do. And it also just adds a great comedic tension there with the Wallace and Gromit character as Norbot comes in, and he's essentially in many ways taking the role of what Gromit does. And a lot of this, the day ins, day outs of what makes Gromit a special character. And that's really works for me in this dynamic between Wallace and Gromit, which is always great. That's really great in this movie. All of the moments also that I should just say, Feathers McGraw, which is a weirdly intense character. I remember being a little scared of him when I was a kid. He is equally as intimidating as he was back then in this movie. He's a really good, intense comedic force in this movie. He has a lot of really funny jokes. The use of silence for this character, where everyone else has a lot of dialogue. The use of silence for the animal characters, especially because Gromit has it as well. It really just elevates everything. And there's a lot of just sight gags with Feathers McGraw in this movie. There's just a lot that really works. There's this hilarious joke, and I believe it's the chief inspector says it about Feathers McGraw regarding, I believe it's a nun, but it comes in like the final act of the movie that I was howling laughing. I thought it was so funny. And with this foil of Feathers McGraw going up against Wallace and Gromit, and then you got this bumbling idiot sheriff or police officer or chief inspector, I guess is what they're called, Albert McIntosh, played by Peter McKay. It just adds this funny dynamic throughout the full movie that, again, is it as good as some of the other Wallace and Gromit stuff I've seen before? No. Is it great to have these characters back at a level that I found comparable to essentially their heyday? Like, yeah, I think that is what this movie is able to achieve. It doesn't miss a beat. This is not something where I'm just like, oh, this is great, but not as good as we used to have it. Like, no, this movie could have come out 10, 15, however long ago Wallace and Gromit were really at their heyday, and would fit in that lineage. I really appreciated that from Netflix. I didn't know if they were going to do it. I think Wallace and Gromit, it's certainly having its fans. I've been seeing it all over social media, especially TikTok. Like, it really has touched a generation of younger people who grew up with these characters. And I think those people like me, they're going to have a lot of fun with it. I'm curious to see if the humor translates to younger audiences today, or if just the claymation look of the movie, of just how it looks compared to other animated movies. I'm curious if kids are going to be able to tangibly relate to these movies like I used to as a kid. Like, there was something, and I think it's the fact that they were all clay and they were all handmade. Like, they felt like Wallace and Gromit felt like my action figures, right? Like, I could pose them, I could play with them. I'm curious if that tangible quality is going to play as well with kids, especially in a generation that's far more not having action figures, I guess, and far more of their fun is had on computers or technology. Like, I'm curious if that will still connect and resonate. But I think it's a really fun kids movie, and I think there's a lot to like about this movie, especially for people who are already pre-programmed to be Wallace and Gromit fans. So this one is a recommendation for me. I had a lot of fun with this movie. I can highly recommend this movie. I think there's a lot of laughs to be had. And yeah, is it as great as I could have hoped? No, I wouldn't say it is. I did find some elements of this movie a little bit lackluster. I felt this movie to just be really contained in a way that I wasn't expecting, especially coming off Curse of the Were-Rabbit, where I think that was just a really expansive world. But this is an extremely, utterly charming movie that I can highly recommend. I'm going 3.5 out of 5 stars for Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. So thank you so much for watching. And I'll just say real quick, just to have it out there, Oscar predictions. I think this is the 5th slot for animated, and I'll be talking about this in a later video this week where I break down basically all my predictions before the Oscar announcements are made. But I think the 5 are going to be Flow, Wild Robot, Inside Out, Memoir of a Snail, and then Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. I think it's a pretty locked 5. So we'll get to those conversations later. If for any of you that are interested in that, make sure to subscribe because I am having a lot of awards discussion on this channel, especially in 2025. So thank you all so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe if you're liking these videos. Take care. Bye-bye.